Hello, everyone. Welcome again to our members meeting for April 2nd, 2022. This is recorded after the meeting simply because we had failed to start the recording when the meeting began. So we're going to make sure that members do have this information when they go to view this video, or if you're a guest, welcome. There are many reasons to become a member of RASC if you aren't already. One of them, or several of them, are the Observer's Handbook, which you would get on an annual basis when you're a member, as well as a copy of the Explore the Universe Guide, subscription to our RASC magazine, Sky News, as well as its scientific journal, the e-letters, RASC Bulletin and the RASC newsletter, and certainly you can access any center's newsletters on the web. And there are lots of other benefits to the program as or becoming a member, as you can see. Also, when you become a member and request to be a member of our center specifically, you also have access to our Nova Notes, our discussion list, our announce list, which provides every member with news of what's going on, as well as our center's resources, such as our library and our SCO, which is the St. Croix Observatory. And along with this membership, you have access to an incredible group of astronomers and mentors across the country, not just here in the center. They're professional and amateur astronomers. They're new as well as experienced. They're astrophotographers, sketchers, visual observers. It's an incredible group of people. You have a world open to you with all sorts of astronomical camaraderie awaiting you. And here's our agenda for the day. We've already welcomed everyone. Our special guests today are David Shuman from Montreal Center, who's going to do part 2 of the new space race, a look at the current launch vehicles in human spaceflight. And he's going to be focusing on Europe and Asian countries as well as Russia. If you missed part 1, it's already on our YouTube site, so you can view part 1 as well if you wish at a later date. Chris Young, a member of our center, is going to be giving us another edition of his incredible sky lore, which is really exciting to listen to. David Hoskin, our observing chair, is going to present what's up in the April skies, to let you know what to keep your eyes looking up to. Paul Heath, our resident poet, will be doing his latest edition for a poem of Food for the Soul, and then I'll be last with news from the board. At which point, when that concludes, recording goes off and members and guests are welcome to join us for the Astro Chat. And keeping in mind that the meeting is recorded, but the Astro Chat is not. So, first of all, we do want to acknowledge the Indigenous lands that we are now in, the Mi'kmaq, the ancestral unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship with the Mi'kmaq and Maliseet peoples, first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Mi'kmaq and Maliseet title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. We also want to make members and guests aware that the RASC and the RASC Halifax Center believe in and practice inclusivity and diversity. All are welcomed, regardless of age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, ethnic origin, color, nationality, national origin, religion or belief, or sex or sexual orientation. And we are opposed to all forms of unlawful and unfair discrimination. So now we will put you on to what was recorded originally with our special guests and the remainder of the meeting. So enjoy. So Halifax Center wants to welcome David Shuman, who is a member of Montreal Center. He's a longtime member of that center and has been a board member as well. He's a graphic designer by trade and an avid photographer and astronomer. He's had several experiences with NASA press credentials, photographing the space shuttle in 1994 to visiting the Keck, Gemini, and Subaru telescopes in 2001. His fascination with spaceflight also allowed him to witness several unmanned launches from KSC in Florida to extensive knowledge of spaceflight and launch websites, or vehicles rather. He's co-creator of the Eclipse mini documentary Shadow Chasers, the Great American Total Eclipse in 2017, shown at the 2019 AGM. And he's done numerous public talks and 3D presentations at NEF in California. And today he's going to, as I mentioned a moment ago, he's going to present part 2 about looking at the rest of the world's plans and ambitions in the space race from China, India, Japan, Europe, and more. So David, welcome, and we look forward to part 2.
Hi, thanks, Judy, for a great intro. Before I start my presentation, as many of you know, the world has changed in the past few years, especially in the past few weeks. And I am showing some material that I created, well, pre-invasion times, if I can be very blunt. If everybody's okay, I'm going to show the Russian side of the space program because it is such a major part of the space, the world of space and launch vehicles. But I'll also talk about the impact of you know, the latest economic sanctions imposed on Roscosmos and the Russian program. But if anybody has objections, I can skip that part too. But I'm talking about the hardware, and I'd rather leave any political stuff out of it, if that's a fair thing for everybody. I personally have half my family comes from Kiev in Ukraine on top of that. So, you know, it's really hurtful for me too right now. So if there's no objections, I'll talk about what's going on in the world of launch vehicles and space projects and programs from outside the United States, because yes, it's hard to believe there is stuff outside of NASA going on. And some of it's pretty exciting and interesting, and that's it. So I'm going to share my screen. Does everybody see a full screen title?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about the new space race and rockets, part 2. Russia, China, India, the European Space Agency, and Japan. And I'll briefly mention a couple of things about the United Kingdom as well, and Germany. Okay, so this is the order that my presentation will follow. I'm going to take a look at Russia, Europe, Japan, China, India, Middle East, and then a Q&A session. And I'll briefly talk about a burgeoning new space programs in the United Kingdom and even in Germany right now by private companies. Okay, so for some that are not familiar, everybody's obviously familiar with the NASA logo, but partners and competitors from around the world have their own logos, like the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Administration, JAXA, the Chinese program, the Indian, I forgot all the acronyms, but the Indian, I think it's a Space Research Organization. Believe it or not, Iran is now in on the game. The European Space Agency being a long time developer of launch vehicles and a big participator in the space program. The Israeli Space Agency and of course Roscosmos, which came out of the Soviet era space program that we're all familiar with from the 1960s. So Roscosmos, although due to economic sanctions and essentially shunting out of Russia in the partnerships that NASA has and with other countries as well, like Europe, of course the Mars mission with Russia and Europe is now, permanently on hold. So, I'll talk about Russia and what they're developing. This has to do essentially pre-invasion times, I guess. So some of these programs might be on hold because of severe financial limitations and dissolving of partnerships. So the Russians were quite important to the history of the rocket developments, because shortly after World War II, as many of us know, United States and Russia took the best scientists from Germany in the V2 rocket program and started developing their own post-World War II programs. And as we all know, the Russians were even successful in sending the first human being into space ahead of the United States. And this fueled, let's be realistic about it. This was definitely a saber-rattling effort on both Russia and the United States parts, because most launch vehicles developed at the time were really intercontinental ballistic missiles for delivering atomic payloads, right? So in the United States, you had the Atlas, the Titan, the Thor, which became a Delta down the road, and on the Russian side, you had the Vostok, the R rocket programs, and many others, which also were developed as ballistic missiles to begin with. So an evolution of the Russian space program icons, and of course, going back to the communist era in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, CCCP and the famous red star were predominant on their logos. But then in the opening of Perestroika and the opening of Russia to the world stage, more for commercial partnerships, we have the Roscosmos that we know of today. And you could see their latest logo on the right-hand side of the screen. So just like United States, Russia had different divisions, the Korolev and a couple of other divisions, and they came out with all kinds of vehicles, not only the famous Soyuz vehicles, but different types of launch vehicles later on, like the Zenit, for example, the Angara, which is quite powerful, the Proton, and of course the Energia, which is famous for boosting Russia's Buran or Blizzard space shuttle into orbit, actually uncrewed, and it was successful. But they needed to develop a super booster, and there's one on here that is not displayed because it actually would not fit in this graph right here, and that's the N1 rocket with more than 30 engines. That was their equivalent of the Saturn V, their answer to the Saturn V to try to get to the moon. And unfortunately, all four of those vehicles completely failed catastrophically upon launch, and then the program was canceled in the early 70s. So, so a little bit of history here. The Soviet R7 Semyorka ICBM derivatives, going from an ICBM system, just like the Atlas did in the States. They were able to put a capsule on board and orbit the getting the first person into space, and then getting the first person into orbit. Of course, Yuri Gagarin being the first human being in space. So this, believe it or not, is still being used today in a stretch, an upper stage modified variant, but the booster itself is still pretty well there. Of course, there's been iterations over the years, but up until even right now, just a few days ago, the base of this rocket, the R7, is still being used. And what's kind of cool is that when these four boosters or liquid boosters actually separate, it creates kind of a smoke trail that looks like a cross in the sky, and they call it the Korolev cross. So here, the Soyuz family of rockets, you can see on the left with cargo payload, the Progress vehicle, which is used to send cargo to the ISS and resupply. And of course, the crewed, the human spacecraft, which holds 3 people, very, very cramped though. As a matter of fact, it's so cramped that the potential astronauts that travel on this Soyuz capsule have to be actually fitted with a mold so that their seat is actually custom molded just for that astronaut. That's how tight it is in there. But over 50 years, it's proved quite reliable, pretty safe, except for a tragic decompression mishap in the early 70s. But it's you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it type of thing. So no, it doesn't have the latest and greatest touch screens like Elon Musk's Dragon capsule, but it's still reliable and it still uses a lifeboat on the ISS in case of an issue where the astronauts have to disembark quickly. Here's up close images of the actual modern version of the Soyuz R7 vehicle, which is used currently to bring astronauts to the ISS. I know that NASA now uses SpaceX's Dragon capsule and the soon to be, if it ever gets off the testing phase, Starliner from Boeing. These capsules can hold easily 3 to 4 astronauts very comfortably, actually. So the Americans, although the last American to come down after 355 days on the ISS just came down in Kazakhstan a couple of days ago. They really left the politics out of it to try to be civil, and that worked out. But that partnership is essentially pretty well dissolved at this point. So there was talk of Russian cosmonauts going up on the Dragon capsule. The Russian government a few months ago did approve cosmonauts to travel safely on the SpaceX rocket, but of course that's all changed now. So just like in the 50s, the Soyuz rocket is carried out in Kazakhstan and other launch. The Russians have developed in the Far East their own, when I say their own, another launch facility, but in their own territory proper. And Kazakhstan is actually an independent of the Russian territory, but they still have a good partnership launching their vehicles unmanned and manned. And so the Baikonur Cosmodrome, they use rail cars to transport horizontally the integrated Soyuz and the capsule and the escape tower. You see all those engines too. There's quite a few engines. It's all liquid-based, kerosene and liquid oxygen. Kind of like what I call like a flower petal when the gantry actually separates and opens up, kind of like a lotus blossom opening up, revealing a rocket in the middle. It's a pretty cool system. Unlike the American system, well, the old Titan, Gemini Titan, did have a gantry that fell back a good 45 degrees and more. This is kind of a unique system. You could actually see the counterweights here at the bottom to allow this to happen. But this has been essentially unchanged for over 50 years. And Russia does have, well, at least up until recently, quite a few international partners for not only carrying astronauts from different countries around the world to the ISS, but actual different cargoes. So they're quite active in the cargo and satellite launching business as well. So here's the business end of those engines, very reliable engines. You could see on the upper right corner, Mars, I believe Mars Express and other missions to Mars and quite a few commercial satellites have been launched by the Soyuz as well. One thing I will mention is that recently, in the past few years, an interesting partnership, which of course has now been dissolved as of a few weeks ago, was that the European Space Agency has an equatorial launch facility in French Guiana. And of course, as everybody knows, launching from the equator gives you the best bang for the buck because you have the slingshot effect from the largest diameter part of the Earth. So anything launched from the equator or near the equator has more value, let's say, with the same launch vehicle than you would have from, let's say, further up north. So by taking the same R7 Soyuz launch vehicle, the cargo version, and getting it launched from French Guiana, that same rocket, without any modifications, has much better capacity for placing heavier objects into orbit. So the European Space Agency and Arianespace had a partnership with Russia where they built a very similar, like you saw here, exact duplicate launch facility as you have in Baikonur, and they built it in the European Space Agency facility in Guyana, in French Guiana, and the Russians would supply the R7 commercial version of their rockets. And they've been launching the OneWeb satellite constellation. Yes, I know, internet in the sky, like it or not. You know, these constellations are going up from everybody, including the Kuiper project from Amazon. Now, OneWeb has been suspended, of course, because of the suspension of the partnership, and they're kind of stuck. So I'd like to say that about a week ago, believe it or not, the competitor, Elon Musk, with Starlink, is going to launch OneWeb on the Falcon 9 for the OneWeb constellation. So right now, Russia's losing out on many commercial contracts, and it's going to start to affect their program. Yes, even rockets are blessed. Here you could see some Russian priests actually giving a blessing for a safe journey, whether it's crewed or not. And there's that Korolov's cross that you see in the middle upon separation of those 4 boosters. And I know this is weird, but in the States, rockets are blessed as well. The Delta rocket has their own priest. I kid you not, from United Launch Alliance, and they do actual blessings of rockets, just like ships, for a safe and successful journey. So what's the future? Well, the future up until recently is, and I keep saying that because everything's up in the air, both economically, financially, and partnership-wise. But even before what's been going on in the past few months, the Russians started to close down again and concentrate more on their programs and not with partnerships, but more self-sustaining. And they were looking at the new Soyuz 5, which would be a powerful replacement for the current design. And as you can see in these graphics, it's a very different look and design from the classic Soyuz R7 that we're used to. Much more powerful, much more capacity for more astronauts. And this is the type of rocket that would help Russia go possibly back to the moon if they have those ambitions, which they do. And they are currently in an agreement with China to do so. I can't talk about Russian rocket hardware history without at least showing you guys what the N1 rocket looked. To me, it looked like a giant upside down ice cream cone. It's weird looking, but it's beautiful as well. Look at all those engines. And yes, that was part of the problem. At the time, the engines were very reliable, but because of high pressure to beat the Americans to getting a human being on the moon first, there was a lot of shoddy workmanship apparently, and some of those N1 engines, you know, were not built perfectly, and that led to the complete destruction of all 4 launches. Most powerful explosions ever from a launch vehicle, with almost the same horsepower as the Saturn V. So imagine, God forbid, a Saturn V fully loaded on the pad. It would be equivalent to a small atomic explosion without the radiation, of course. But yeah, look at a double rail track just to bring out the assembly for the N1 rocket, a true beast. The Energia Buran, the Energia booster was developed to bring the Russian version of the space shuttle. And yes, it looks very familiar to the American version. That's not an accident. However, what's different about the Russian shuttle is it was powered. In other words, it's a glider, but it also had its own engines. The shuttle had engines, but the Buran worked on a different way to get there, and it relied heavily on that energy booster, which also would have a cargo version for heavy launch lifts. The energy is not really used too much right now. Very, very expensive. And as you could see, I believe the Buran flew only twice, and landed completely automated on a runway in the deserts of Russia. So here you could see the whole assembly on the pad. And it was supposed to be crewed, but like I said, the first launch obviously was remote. Unlike the American program, where John Young and Robert Crippen were the first test pilots on the Columbia. And here you could see the Buran coming down on its own automation there. So you have the Proton. The Proton is also heavily used. It uses hypergolic fluids for launching, so it's quite toxic actually. Hypergolic fluids are rocket fuels that ignite upon contact. When you have two separately kept liquid fuels, when they instantly touch, they instantly ignite and are self-igniting. Used on the Titan rocket as well, and on a lot of side boosters for programs. The Proton uses this kind of system to get heavy payloads into space. And here you could see a cargo variant for resupplying the ISS and commercial launches. The Zenit rocket is interesting because in the 90s, they had a partnership with the Sea Launch, which was with, I believe, Boeing at the time, and the Russian space program had a partnership where they would actually use a converted oil rig to be able to be taken out in the middle of the ocean to the equator. And for many commercial clients, here's an Amos 4 satellite for Israel. That's a commercial satellite. They would be able to position the launch platform from this converted oil rig, which was also a giant ship. That was the command center. And they would back away from the rocket on the pad on the launch oil derrick. And they would launch from the best strategic places around the world for the clients. There were a couple of failures, but there were quite a few successes. But then the program was retired a while ago. It is quite expensive today. The Sea Launch platform is located, I believe, in Los Angeles, parked. And the Zenit rocket is slated to be replaced with those newer variants that the Russians are working on. But a true workhorse for cargo carrying. Here's that Sea Launch that I talked about. Well into the 90s, with quite a few successful launches. So I know Elon Musk is looking right now, and so is Blue Origin when they have their New Glenn rocket. They're going to use converted oil rig systems to launch their powerful rockets. Well, at least to launch the spaceship from Elon Musk in the ocean. And in the case of the New Glenn, a very large rocket under development, which it was just pushed back another year, by the way, it would be landing on a rigged platform in the ocean as well. So the ocean is an interesting place to launch because it's away from populations. If there's a mishap, there's less chance of loss of life or property, and access to the equator is much easier this way. So in recent years, the Russians also developed the Angara rocket, a powerful variant that a new class of ultra booster that can launch quite a lot for the Russians, including space station components and commercial as well as capsule versions for astronauts, going from none to 2 to 4 strap-on boosters greatly increases, and these are liquid boosters. So this new rocket was successfully tested about I believe, if I'm not mistaken, over 10 years ago. But this is the rocket that's slated to replace the Zenit and the older systems that are being combined. Just a quick map as recent as a couple of years ago of the launch facilities scattered around Russia. Russia is a vast country, and when they used to be in Kazakhstan, of course, the further south you are, like I mentioned earlier, the better value that you get out of your launch vehicles. And they had built a new launch facilities further to the east, just in case that they were cut out of Kazakhstan in the future. I'm going to move on to the European Space Agency. Europe have combined, and yes, Britain is still part of this, even with the Brexit from a few years ago. Britain is still part of this partnership, and it's mostly based out of France and Germany, where a lot of the hardware is built in Italy, but mostly in France by CNES and Arianespace. Not only have the French built their own launch vehicles and the British small launch vehicles, the Zermatt, for example, but as the Europeans got together and pooled their resources, they came out with the Ariane family of launch vehicles. And today they have not only the Ariane 5, which is the current version, as a matter of fact, that's what launched the James Webb Telescope into orbit earlier. They also have the Vega family, which is based on a solid rocket motor. And that's for microsatellite launches. So they're trying to compete like the rest of the world on small microsatellites, which are becoming very popular as electronics can truck them down. But they're also concentrating still on the very heavy lifting, such as the James Webb Telescope. That's really the only rocket with its huge nose cone and payload capacity that could have taken the James Webb into orbit, as we don't have the shuttle anymore. So here you see the family of Ariane rockets. So you have the Ariane 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, which ran for quite a few years, and it was one of their heavy lifters, working in conjunction with the 5. And now the 4 has been dropped. It's been, it's been well over a decade and a half that they don't use the 4 anymore. But one thing that's unique for the European launches is that they're mostly dual launches. So they would never launch one satellite, but they would launch 2 in a dual fairing configuration. You could see here on the Ariane 4, the tall one in the middle, it has a dual section, and that's actually for 2 satellites at a time. And these are not small satellites. These are not microsatellites. These are the big communication satellites, the Intelsats, the internet in the sky, and weather satellites. So now the 2 rockets on the right, the Ariane 5, Ariane 5 Evolution, are the main rockets that are used for launches for Ariane. However, not to be left out of the race, here's an older picture from the 70s. And I believe it was on Christmas Eve that they had their successful flight of the Ariane 1, putting a communication satellite for Europe in space. Here, I'll just go through a few of them. They're stretch versions of the Ariane 1. And then they started taking international customers. So DirecTV, for example, was launched quite often on an Atlas and the Ariane 4 rocket. So satellite TV in the early to mid 90s was a big thing. Here's a couple of launches of the ESA's Ariane 5. The Gaia launch as well was done with the Ariane 5. Actually, no, I'm sorry. Many space programs like the James Webb was on the Ariane 5, but the Gaia program was here launching a Soyuz R7. So that was the partnership that they had with Russia and the frigate upper stage. And it's part of what's going to be, for better or worse, well, it's, everybody's a loser with this, but this is the kind of partnership that is now canceled. And that facility is just dormant right now. But some of the big science launches. But now we get on to the what's next part and the interesting part. You'll notice a little baby shuttle up in the right-hand corner. Yes, in the 70s and 80s, the European Space Agency was slated to build the Hermes, which was a baby shuttle that can actually ferry a couple of astronauts to the proposed ISS at the time, and to a European space module, Columbus module, which later on became integrated into the ISS. But because of financial constraints, that program was quickly, unfortunately, canceled. It rode atop an Ariane 5, and it was actually exposed with its little wings. So it kind of looked like the Dream Chaser, like a mini shuttle on top of the booster. And the Europeans are going back to this little lifting body shuttle concept. Here you can see on the upper right. This is currently under development. It is uncrewed. It won't be crewed. It's just autonomous for cargo and returning items back to the Earth quickly and easily without having to land in the ocean, for example. But here you have your current family of Ariane 5, your Vega rockets, but there's a stretch version of the Vega to help even more access to more clients with microsatellites. But to replace the Ariane 5, which is now getting on in age, is the Ariane 6, which will use 2, none, or 4 strap-on boosters. But these boosters are really much more powerful than the older variants. So the Ariane 5 had 2 very large strap-on boosters, but the Ariane 6 will be able to use combinations of none, 2, or 4 to give different payload combinations and a more versatile upper stage. And now that the race for reusability and economics are a big deal, they're looking into an upper stage that is actually reusable for the Ariane 6. So they don't want to be left out of the race. The Ariane 6 is very well into development, and the first flights of it, I believe, are in about a year from now. This will eventually replace the Ariane 5 as the workhorse for the European Space Agency. So here's on the left upper part is a artist concept of what that Hermes baby shuttle or space plane would have looked like. I would have died to see this. This would have been the coolest thing. Although much smaller than the shuttle, it's like a third the size. It would have been a really amazing thing for the Europeans to actually autonomously have astronauts launched to space on their own program without having to rely on the Russians or Americans. They'd be the third, one of the, well, now there's more than 3, but they would have been a big player. So right now they're still dependent on other countries for getting astronauts into orbit. And on the bottom right is a current graphic of the lifting body shuttle that is supposed to start being used. This one's an experimental vehicle, but the full-size version, which is not that large also, it's not like shuttle-sized, it's much smaller, but they're supposed to start using that in the near future as well. Here's a map quickly, just to give you a feeling of where this is near the equator. So not all too far from Florida, like, I mean, well, it's a few hours, but in French Guiana is the Guiana Space Center. in Kuru, and you could see the Vega and the RA5 facilities. This is completely in the jungle, but it's right off of the ocean, and it's quite a modern facility, as a matter of fact. Okay, people think of rockets, but they don't necessarily think of Japan. And, you know, we have Sony from Japan, we have Mitsubishi from Japan, we have like everything from Japan practically. But what about rockets? Well, even in the 60s, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, or JAXA, wanted to have Japan get in on the action of not only launching their own scientific commercial vehicles, but also for communications and for peaceful use of space. And so they didn't have a design of their own. So what they did was, if you look here, they have the Lambda series of sounding rockets that they developed, and the M3, S2, more powerful variants. But if you see the N1, N2, and H1, they may look a little familiar. It's almost like they look like the Delta, the old Delta rockets from the United States. And to no surprise, that's exactly what they are. They were actually licensed by, back then, it's Boeing now, but it was McDonnell Douglas that had licensed the Nippon company. Oh, well, Nippon is actually, you know, Japanese for Japan, but they actually gave a license to Japan to manufacture the Delta rocket for Japan. And they didn't have the larger strap-on solid motors like the more advanced Delta rockets did, but the N2 and H1, and even the N1 with 3 engines, was able to get Japan well into the space race and placing a lot of commercial payloads into space as well. And they have a beautiful, apparently people say it's one of the most beautiful launch facilities in the world, in the southernmost tip of Japan, right off the ocean, of course. And I'll show you a picture shortly. But they developed their own in-house rocket, their own engine, the H2, back in the 90s. And right now, it's being used to launch, for example, the mission to Mars for the United Arab Emirates was launched on an H2 rocket. And it's Mitsubishi that manufactures these rockets. So a lot of famous names that we're familiar with, like say like Chrysler, Boeing, you know, they manufacture all the big hardware for NASA. Well, it's no different in Japan. The heavy industries like Mitsubishi and other companies manufacture rockets and components. And using up to 4 solid rocket motors to give it a good kick, the H2B under development is Japan's well, most powerful variant. Here's an early look at there are smaller sounding rockets, the Epsilon and the Lambda from the past. Here, the pardon me if I mispronounce this, but Tangekashima Space Center is located on an island off the southern tip of Japan. Like I said, people regard it as one of the most beautiful vistas for launching rockets, aside from the one in New Zealand now from the Electron launch facility from Rocket Labs. That's also kind of like this beautiful peninsula, like part of the island where they launch the rockets. So there's a picture of the old H1 rocket, which is based on the what's called the straight 8 design of the Delta and the Delta II. On the right is from Kennedy Space Center, Complex 17, and that's Westar for Western Union, launched back in the 70s and 80s. And you could see they're, well, virtually identical models of rocket, and that's because they are. And those Castor rocket motors were built by Northrop Grumman at the time, Orbital ATK, over time, all these companies keep merging and merging and merging. And now there's just a few companies like McDonnell Douglas was Douglas Aircraft and McDonnell Douglas, and then was Martin Marietta and Lockheed Martin. And now it's just ULA, which is part of Boeing and Lockheed Martin that own all these. But I just want to show you how similar these were, and the evolution of the H rocket. But at least it got Japan into the game quickly and successfully. This was quite a successful launch vehicle. The Delta series is one of the most successful rockets ever built, period, ever, with hundreds of successful flights in the past, of course, always uncrewed. So on the right, you can see the H2 rocket, which is much larger, much more powerful variant of the Japan's in-house built engines as well. Sad to say, there was a tragedy once where someone was welding near one of the engines. There was something on the pad, and the engine exploded and killing that worker. But outside of that, there's been pretty good success rate with safety for this rocket. And you could see it's a much more advanced facility than the one I showed before, from the 60s. The one on the left, that's the exact launch tower and flame trench that the Delta used in Florida. So just in comparison, the H-2A, in comparison to a modern Falcon 9 from today, the Soyuz workhorse that we know of, and the Ariane 5 of today. So the H-2A, with its different variants, supply different capacities for commercial launches. And they do have launches from around the world for partnerships from the United States, from Europe, and even for science missions, because it's quite a powerful workhorse. As you notice, the engine, the orange insulation means that these are using very, very cold fuels like liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen, just like the shuttle and the SLS are using. So this is manufacturing assembly in Mitsubishi. And these are the H3 future down the road variants, always using these strap-on motors to give different capacities to the core stage. But obviously it's a super stretch version, which is going to be more competitive with what's happening now with the American side. Now looking at China, and China's become a very big player in the past 40 years. Matter of fact, the China National Space Administration, it's kind of interesting because China is a communistic country. Not only is the government funding their own space program and throwing all kinds of, resources and money to it, as I'll talk about in a second, they're taking a brute force approach to returning or actually going to the moon for the first time. They really want to beat the Americans with Artemis by landing a human being or taikonaut on the moon by 2027. They stated that goal a couple of months ago. It's still quite a secret program, but they've been making good strides in success, step by step. As a matter of fact, they even have taikonauts in orbit on their own space station right now. So for a country that started off like other countries by heavily borrowing on licensing and manufacturing from partners like Russia. So you're going to see a few pictures soon of the Chinese capsules that kind of look like the Soyuz, and that's not an accident. That was through a partnership with Russia to get fast-tracked to going into space. They started humble as well with sounding rockets, with small payloads. And today they have one of the most powerful launch systems for heavy payloads as possible. The only thing is, like I mentioned, is the brute force approach. And I'll explain that. You see, right now, although they started off with smaller rockets, they have the Long March family right now. And the Long March 4, Long March 5, and a new Long March, which is in development, I'll show a graphic in a minute, will be their super powerful vehicle that will be able to take many astronauts simultaneously, I think up to 7, to their space station at a time, and a vehicle to go to the moon. Why did I say brute force? I mean it. They're not looking at reusability like Elon Musk's Starliner. They're just using powerful rockets with giant boosters to just get there from A to Z in one shot. So although the rockets, in the United States, the economy of manufacturing is becoming a big deal. That's why it's become very commercialized, right? So you have like Blue Origin and you have SpaceX, and the old hat, which was Boeing and Lockheed Martin's, although they're merged together with United Launch Alliance, and they have the new Vulcan Centaur slated to launch on its maiden voyage to the moon, actually, with the Peregrine lander this December. The Chinese also have their competitive program, but unlike answering to shareholders, they kind of have an limitless fund of money that can be thrown into this program just to get it done. Kind of like the old space race where it was cost plus. So it didn't matter if it was 10 billion, 20 billion, and say they couldn't design something the right way, they had to throw more money at it. No problem, they get the funding. And so this is kind of that brute force mentality that the Chinese are going with. So they're not looking as much into reusability, something burning up or whatever. They don't care. They just want to get there and place things on the moon. And they have successfully placed a bunch of rovers right now on the moon, and quite successful as well. So for a country that was not considered part of the space race just a few decades ago, they're not only a serious contender, but actually may put the American program in jeopardy, if I say, of actually beating the Americans and Europeans to the moon, the new moon race. So here you could see a smaller Long March vehicle and a larger one. But what's interesting when I mention that the rocket program in China is not only the government part, but they did develop what they call commercial development, where they're allowing commercial companies in China, and I use that in air quotes, kind of like SpaceX and kind of like Blue Origin and Electron Rocket Lab and Firefly and Astra. They're also fostering a sense of competition amongst their own private companies in Russia to kind of come out with their commercial vehicles to fight against the SpaceXs of the world for commercial contracts. And so far, here you see the Long March, and at the bottom you can see people for scale. It's quite a powerful rocket. And before I continue with the commercial items, it's these Long March vehicles that are bringing components to the Chinese space station, the Chang'e Space Lab, Chang'e 2, because their first one actually burned up, I believe 2 years ago, over the atmosphere. Now, the problem with the Chinese launches is that although they're many times secret locations, or they're always publicized after the fact, they don't seem to have regard to where these things land, including their own people. So a bunch of years ago, the Long March rocket actually failed and killed close to 600 people in a village that was located not far from a launch site in the land. It was located near a village. And it was using that hypergolic fluid, which is technically liquids that dissolve flesh. I mean, that's how dangerous. I forgot what it's called, tetranitrate hydrazine or something. It's essentially caustic to human flesh. And never mind that, when this rocket tumbled down and exploded on this village, not only causing severe damage, but I believe, if I'm not mistaken, hundreds and hundreds of people perished. In a normal world, this would be totally unacceptable. Imagine a SpaceX rocket landing in Orlando by accident and killing hundreds of people. I mean, that would be the end of the company. It just simply wouldn't be allowed. Here, because the government is essentially everything, and they do what they want at almost all costs. That is one of the reasons why their program is so fast-tracked, and they're making good progress. And although the rockets used to be quite unreliable, that's a thing of the past. They're having very good successes lately. Here on the bottom right, you can actually see a screen graphic of the different capsules being developed at their scale. So at the far left, you have the upcoming Stratoliner from Boeing that will be able to bring 4 people at a time to the ISS. The famous Dragon capsule, which SpaceX, by the way, just announced this week, they will not manufacture anymore. There's only 4 now. And they say they're satisfied enough to supply the ISS until Starship comes online. So it's the end of the line for that capsule right now, as far as manufacturing. In the middle is the Orion capsule that can hold comfortably 4 people to the moon and beyond, and sort of comfortably 7 astronauts like the shuttle used to certain stations like the Gateway. And then the Russian ones on the right in comparison for size. So I'm sorry, the Chinese capsules. So the new Chinese capsules can easily hold 4 to 7 people. And no, they're not that small at all. So this is definitely not something lightly to be taken lightly. Here you can see some beautiful pictures of taikonauts inside their capsules. And just like the Russian program, they do land on land and get picked up on land, as usual with parachutes in the capsule. And this is still based closely on the Soyuz design. Like I said, though, the new capsules are going to be totally built completely by China themselves. Here's a mock-up of the space station. So the Chinese have also their public displays of programs. And on the bottom left, you can see a graphic of the former Mir space station and the current ISS. And in the middle, not so small, is the Chinese space station, which many of those modules are currently up there now, but they keep adding more to them. And we're going to start to see brighter things in the sky now, aside from just the ISS from China. So here's a cutaway graphic of that space station. Now, compared to the ISS, yeah, there's still, a lot of physical room that's missing. But for a country doing this on their own, and I keep bringing that up, it's not bad. I mean, this is incredible. It took the partnership of the whole world, including the United States, Russia, and Europe, and many smaller partners like Canada, to bring the ISS to fruition. But now it's just taking one country on their own practically to start building modules in space. And they do have very big ambitions for settling, not landing on the moon, but settling on the moon permanently. Yes, in the southern part of the moon as well, not far from Shackleton Crater. Here in EVA, this is not a graphic on the right, an EVA of a taikonaut and a larger capsule under development on the upper image. A series of rovers on the moon, and of course now on Mars, as we all know, and quite successful. These rovers kind of look like the ones from NASA, but then again, how many variations on a rover can you do? Like if it works, it works. I'm not saying that these things were not developed without taking a sneak peek at what NASA was doing, but they are successful, and there's new moon missions being planned, landers and sample return missions being planned, as well as bring human beings in 2027. Now, will they make it by then? We don't know. It's just too close for us to really know. I know that NASA promises to be on the moon by 2020. Well, it was 2024, now it's 2025, and That's being pushed to 2027. So it could be a tight race. It is very interesting though. Here's also a couple of places deep inside China, and also in the Wenchang facility on the ocean. It's those inner launch facilities where a lot of the military launches take place, and unfortunately accidents and tragedies. Many of them we still don't really know 100% about. Well, what's interesting is China's neighbor, India, has a burgeoning space program as well. And the Indian Space Research Organization, they're quite advanced now, actually. And India has started also, like many countries, with small sounding rockets and small boosters to get research payloads into the stratosphere, the upper stratosphere, you know, to test out things. But now they have their PSLV, GSLV, and other rockets. Now, these acronyms simply mean polar launch vehicles and geostationary launch vehicles. And this denotes where the satellites are placed into orbit. Let's say a polar orbit or a geostationary orbit, let's say like weather satellites, for example. India launches often enough, and they have quite a few facilities as well. But they're also developing the next generation of boosters like every country. So they launch for the United States and other commercial entities. They do have, like every country, they've had some failures as well, but quite a few successes. And these are not small rockets anymore. The latest ones are capable of launching interplanetary missions. So not quite the human yet, but they are planning to launch satellites towards Mars and other places as well. And as you know, they tried to explore the moon. Unfortunately, that was unsuccessful. But a version 2 of that same mission is going to be taking place. So they'll get there. They'll get there. And you got to keep trying. And India's doing this by themselves as well. So here's one of the more recent modern launches, and you could see quite like many other facilities with a gantry for access. They also have their facilities in the outskirts, far away from people, for safety reasons. So here's a comparison. The Geostationary Launch Vehicle Mark III, for example, it's kind of stubby looking. You can compare it to the RASC, the Delta IV Heavy, and the Falcon 9 in height. So still not too close to the modern monsters that we have today, but getting there and not all too far away. When you think about it, 8,000 kilograms of capacity, that's not bad, actually. It can put quite a few types of modern communication satellites for clients into orbit. They're also working on a little baby shuttle, uncrewed, of course, and scale tests using sounding rockets have been successful so far. And they're going to start scaling up their shuttle. And as the reason for using a shuttle is essentially to bring back cargo and landing it conveniently without having it to splash down in the ocean or on land. And this is completely reusable. The Swadeshi space shuttle. Just like, you know, the modern shuttle, boosted by a rocket, comes back with a heat shield and lands conveniently for easy access. Here's a map. I like to always show a map of where these things are. So it's not far from Chennai in the southern part of India, the Satish Dhawan Space Center. I'd love to try to visit some of these places in the future. I've been to the American ones, but be an excuse to travel around the world. And lastly, but not least, the Middle East. Yes, the Middle East and rockets. Not such a good combo, people would think, but Israel has the Shavit, which is the Comet, and although a lot of these programs do take place from military applications, Israel has placed their own satellites into orbit for their communications and infrastructure. Of course, they take off from the desert areas, which is unpopulated. And they've been quite successful, actually, with their rocket program. And they do have a partnership around the world with other launch providers because they develop their own satellites. Sad to say, one satellite made here in Montreal for Israel, the Amos 6, actually exploded on the launch pad for SpaceX on a Falcon 9 when it was refueling a few years ago in Kennedy Space Center. One of the struts failed and one of the helium tanks ruptured, destroying the entire rocket on the pad and the launch pad itself. And it contained one of their Amos 6 communication satellites built by McDonnell Detweiler here in Montreal. So Israel also didn't have any luck with their Beersheba rocket that landed. It was taken up by SpaceX. Actually, that's where this t-shirt came from. A friend of mine went to actually photograph the launch in Florida. And it actually crashed on the moon, just like the Indian lander on the moon. It couldn't quite make it, but it was also privately funded. So the Iranians have a space program as well, and they claim to have, peaceful intentions. But I'll leave it to your imagination, with all of these. Like I said, many of these rocket programs came out of a military background, a military need. And let's be frank, all the stuff from the United States that we know of today, the Atlas Delta, the Thor program, the Titan, these were all military rockets at heart, fast-tracked to become for civilian use. But here we have, I believe, the Qasid messenger launch vehicle. And I believe they had, this launch actually was not successful, but they keep trying to get into orbit with a small sat. These are very small rockets. But the United Arab Emirates, although they don't have their own launch vehicle, they do have their own spacecraft. And as you know, one of them is orbiting Mars right now. So there's starting to become a lot of different countries around the world. Like Brazil, for example, has a very big space program. They have their own satellites. And one thing before I wrap up is that recently, a lot of the commercial companies now coming out of Cornwall in England, using very small rockets, and Germany as well, they're coming out with small sat launchers to compete with Firefly and Electron from Rocket Labs. And this is why Rocket Labs is starting to move to the Neutron rocket, which is going to compete more with the Falcon 9 series, because it's starting to become a very crowded market for the small sat. So, that concludes my talk about different rocket systems from around the world. Whether the future is rosy or not, I'm hoping that the Chinese don't go to a military, command of space. But the United States did create a few years ago, the Space Force. So I'm hoping we don't start to see more militarization of space, but more of a commercial and friendly and scientific endeavor. But that's it. Are there any questions?
Thanks so much, David. Very interesting. It's intriguing as to how quickly some of these countries are, in fact, coming up to speed.
It's eye-opening.
It is. There was a question from Linda Neal earlier on about the R7 and the support pedal structure that unfolds as the rocket takes off. Yeah. She said, you mentioned it hasn't changed for 50 years. How often does the support system need to be replaced? How does it withstand the heat for takeoff? And how extreme is the heat?
Oh, that's a good question. So you're talking about that flower petal thing that opens up on their launch. So I was lucky to see it, well, not so lucky, when the Mars Global Surveyor rockets were launched. I actually went down for Christmas to the Kennedy Space Center, and I saw what the launch tower looks like after the Delta II burned it. And so unlike what you see in those fancy pictures, I took pictures of this launch tower that was all charred and burned. And believe it or not, although especially the solid rocket motors can be up to 4,000 degrees, very, like the ones for the SLS, those two boosters, they actually use refractory bricks from a crematorium and from blast furnaces to actually line the ramp underneath to be able to take the intense heat from these engines that range into the thousands of degrees. So the solid rocket motors especially have to withstand that. But the towers and everything, although they have to be repainted often, they don't get replaced quite often. They do last for decades. And as a matter of fact, the Delta one in Florida, because that's the one I know quite a lot about, was torn down, well, you know, about 10 years ago. It was finally torn down, and it was there for decades. So aside from the tower itself being charred, the paint is charred. It's a special heat resistant paint. The tower survives. It's designed to take the punishment of this. And using water for dousing is very important. And it's no exception in the Russian system. What you don't see in the Russian one is they have a very big flame pit that's underneath that whole structure that allows the flames to be absorbed as it's pushing off. It also is doused with a whole water system to actually suppress the noise and vibration. But when I was in Florida about 5 years ago for the SLS, we actually took a bus tour and they showed us the flame diverter right next to us with those refractory bricks that are used in like furnaces and blast furnaces. And that's the technology they use with tiles to make sure these things are usable every few weeks without replacing. Because that wouldn't be too convenient if you had to rebuild this stuff every time you needed to launch. It costs billions to build the infrastructure for this, the water pipes, the fueling. Don't forget, all the fueling is done through those umbilicals. And so when you go to Florida and you're going to see Complex 39, you'll see a giant sphere, and that's where liquid hydrogen is stored. And that caused a problem with SpaceX this week because the SLS was fueled up yesterday for the first time ever, a wet dress rehearsal before they go to the moon in a few months. And they're going to take the SLS back to the VAB to get it ready for that launch. But because they were busy fueling it, SpaceX couldn't fuel their rocket to send 4 people to space with the Axiom 1 mission. So there's actually a space jam, and that's no pun intended. It's actually a space jam of facilities for fueling at the Kennedy Space Center because there's too much traffic. I mean, can you imagine that? We're living in a time when there's so many rockets going up and there's so much going on that there's a problem with the liquid hydrogen getting pumped into these things because my neighbor's taking up another launch and the other one has to wait. Of course, the SLS has supreme priority being a NASA mission. That's how that works. I hope that answered the question. So these things do survive decades, just new paint job.
Yeah. There was another question from the same viewer, but when speaking about rockets from China, towards the end, you had a picture of the 3 Asian astronauts.
Yes.
You mentioned something about this was serious. Missed what you said. Do you remember what that point was?
Well, and they're called taikonauts, just like cosmonauts and astronauts. What I meant serious is that I meant to say that, if I'm not mistaken, that it's a serious competitor. So no longer is China can be looked at, oh, they're just, you know, putting little things into space. They're as much a spacefaring nation as the United States, Russia. Oh, well, that's about it, right? Because these are the only 3 countries that can autonomously bring human beings into orbit. No other country on Earth has that capacity yet. Not the Europeans, not the, not India yet, and not Japan. So they all rely on international partnerships to get up into space. So when I meant that it's getting serious is that it really is a three-way race right now, or system, to getting people up there and to the moon.
Okay. If I haven't seen anything else in the chat, does anyone out there in the viewer land have any questions? Please unmute yourself and ask. I'll wait a couple seconds, see if anybody has another question.
For those that haven't seen it, I'll show you that I am truly weightless.
Uh-huh.
Okay, that's as far as my rolling chair can go in my room. Like,
okay, well, thanks so much, David. Very interesting. I'm
thank
sure
you for having me. I'm going to apologize. I have to go on another mission right now, but I've been so happy to be part of your talks for the past 2 sessions. And I'm thrilled that although the pandemic has not been a fun thing for us, it's allowed us through Zoom to really interact with a lot of people. I see Carl's on, and I see Peter Jedicke, and we have so many friends out there now from the States, from England, from New Zealand. So just before I leave, I'll give a little bit about our center. Not only during the COVID have we been very active with these kind of talks from quite a few people and professionals and other centers like yourselves, but we are starting to climb out of our cocoon, our COVID cocoon, and we have a full, with the will of God, we have the full slate of viewing activities planned. Well, our first star party was supposed to be tonight, but as usual, it's not COVID that's stopping it. It's the Montreal Nebula, also known as clouds. We might get into radio or other type of cloud-induced astronomy, but shy of renting hot air balloons and other things. Yeah, so we do have quite a few activities. We're participating for space on May the 7th, Astronomy Day, with the local planetarium. I'm currently 3D printing a giant SLS model. And we're going to have like hands-on displays for kids. And so we're quite active with that. And I'm really proud to be the member of the RASC and a board member for the past 30 years. I can't believe I said that.
There you go. Okay, and I do recognize there's a hand up there. Are you up for one more question and then we'll call it quits?
Absolutely.
Okay, Linda, if you could lower your hand, but if you could unmute yourself and then ask your question, please.
Oh, okay. I put it in chat. The question was,
yeah,
like the UN, is there something like that for space? And if not, when?
Okay, right now, there's a concerted effort led by the Americans, by NASA, called the Artemis Accords. And the Artemis Accords is an international agreement, which they had a new partnership signed yesterday, I believe it was Singapore, where the countries and organizations that sign on to this pact agree to use space, mining of space, rights of space, the moon and its resources in a responsible manner outlined in the Artemis Accords. And I don't know all the details, but the idea is to not make this kind of like the Arctic, where it's a race to get oil or gold or whatever, but to make the moon a place that's neutral and not owned or claimed by any specific country. Unfortunately, the first country to totally kibosh this stuff was Russia. And that was the beginning a few years ago of kind of the downfall of the Russian participation in the ISS. As many of you know, they even talked about disconnecting their modules from the ISS right behind me and actually going on their own. And they recently, the Russians and Chinese have gotten into agreement to go back to the moon together, or to try to go to the moon together. When I say back, I mean human beings going back to the moon. So yeah, there's the Artemis Accords. United Nations is responsible in some cases for the traffic that's up there. So a couple of years ago, there was an example of someone complaining that the Chinese parked their satellite in the wrong orbit and it was in the way of their satellite, because each satellite has to get a parking orbit for their satellite so that it doesn't collide or cause interference with other satellites, as there are literally thousands of satellites up there right now. Like I said, people don't realize there's launches every day practically around the world from one country or another. But as far as I know, there's no universal agreement like you would think. And I think that now that commerce, never mind governments, but commerce is starting to become a real thing in space, we need to kind of get together. And when you say, if not now, when, now is the time, because the when part might be too late. And before I let you go with this, can you imagine, and this is technically possible now, using swarm satellite technology, the way we use swarm drones here on Earth, each drone, each microsatellite would be a powerful light emitting diode of color, let's say red, green, and blue. And by using a swarm, they could have the McDonald's logo, for example, hovering above the Earth like we see the ISS. But imagine like a pixie dot matrix thing of a big arch M with the red icon, McDonald's. But you can't get out of that. You can't get it away. It's in space. So if you think that's something of sci-fi, that's being developed right now, not by McDonald's, that is. I'm using that as an example. But the advertising in space, there's a company in China that's actually working on that right now. So who would stop that? I think that would be an abomination. And I'm in the marketing graphic design for a living. But to me, space is absolutely the limit. And I don't know about you guys, but I'd hate to see some Dunkin' Donuts things streaking across our astrophotos. I mean, oh my God. So that's one very small example of, if we don't get our stuff together, that kind of thing can happen. But then the question is, let's say it's illegal and it's against the Artemis Accords. What are you going to do about it? Knock it down with your anti-satellite? Yes, that's possible too. But where does that stop? Nuclear war? Is that a sovereign thing? Well, you blew down my billboard in space. Well, I'm going to knock down your weather satellite. Like, where does this end? And that's almost starting to become an issue. So that's as far as I know about accords. The Artemis Accord is the latest and greatest. But yes, the United Nations does have a body that is supposed to take care of this. But I don't know what kind of power they have to back that up. And as we see in the past, a lot of these threats are empty, unfortunately.
Hopefully in the future, the politics will cool down a little bit and some of these world accords will in fact be a happier accord versus,
yeah, I hope so too.
tit for tat.
I hope so. Okay, well, I'm going to go unless there's another question, but thank you kindly for having spent some time with me today.
Great. Thanks so much, David. Very much appreciated.
Anytime.
Take care.
Bye.
Okay. Next up on our agenda, we go from space rockets further into space to look at Skylore. So I'm going to ask Chris Young, a longtime member here at the center. He's served on the board in various capacities, and was certainly as secretary. And Chris, you've had a long-standing interest in Skylore, so I'll let you take it from here, please.
Thank you, Judy. What we got here? Is that my do you see the full screen?
No, just see you right now, sir.
What do we got? Share. How's that?
Perfect.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so I have two stories today to give you. One's from Western Canada, and the other is from sort of the northern part of South America. The first story is, come on, there we go. First story is a Cree star story, and the Cree are, there's a variety of Cree. There's the Plains Cree, Swampy Cree, Woods Cree. There's a variety, and they have similar languages that pretty much stretch across Canada. The story that I'm telling was recorded, well, or I collected, I believe, in Manitoba, but it could be probably common for the Western provinces. And our story deals with the Little Dipper, and they refer to it as the dog stars for reasons that will come clear. And this story comes from these night sky star stories that they were collected by Wilfred Buck. And he has published a small book collecting these stories. And this is the gentleman here. He's a science teacher with the Manitoba First Nations Education Resource Center, and his job is to try and interest young people in science. But he takes the position of two-eyed seeing that we talk about here, which is, and he is trying to introduce their the sort of the sky lore of their heritage, the Cree heritage, and he has an inflatable dome that he takes around and does presentations of the constellations at various locations. I think in mostly, I guess, in Western Canada. This little grainy photograph over here, I couldn't resist because it looks a lot like the upper field at Smiley's at Nova East, right? Other than the tents are a little bit different. So Wilfred Buck has contributed to this. This is a poster which shows the Cree constellations, and this is an ongoing effort in order to sort of collect their sky stories, their constellations, and populate the sky with them for their educational and purposes. And their constellations are superimposed on the Western constellations, so you can kind of locate them. So he did this with several others, and the Ojibwe and also the Lakota, they also have their own posters. They have little handbooks that go with them, and until recently, the RASC National RASC Center had planispheres that had these on. So here's a Cree camp in Alberta in the late 1900s, and so our story is here. And so long ago, people had no dogs. There were no animal companions for a lonely child or to help the elders on long forced marches to new campsites in search of food during times of famine. The people were always surprised when visitors or raiders or marauding animals showed up in their camps. They had no warning system that would tell them that danger might be near. Young men were tasked with guarding the camps at night, but this wasn't always reliable, as sometimes they got hungry, sometimes they had to go to the bathroom, sometimes they fell asleep, or as Wilfred Buck said in one of his YouTube videos, or their honeys came to visit them. So our relatives, the wolf, coyote, and fox, saw this and they were concerned. The wolves had a council, and it was decided that they would send two of their own to live with the people. So here we have our wolf pups. And so the coyotes and the foxes had their own council, and they agreed that they would do the same. So we have, come on, there we go. So we have red fox cubs here and some coyote pups to live with the people. So And then, so 2 pups from each of these groups was sent, and they're sent to the 4 directions of humankind. And they came and they adapted, they changed, they flourished. And from these gifts came all the dogs that now inhabit the world. These dogs now guard our homes, our communities, our camps, and our loved ones. To honor this sacrifice made by our animal relatives, the Creator placed a reminder in the heavens, which is the Little Dipper, of the dog, which would forever be a guardian for humans. Polaris anchors the dog's leash as the dogs run around the circumference of the sky camp, alert and ever on guard. The stars of this constellation, particularly those on the handle of the Little Dipper, represent the wolf, and we have the coyote and the fox. And the bowl of the Dipper represents the pups that were sent to the 4 directions. So that's the story from the Cree story of the dog stars, our Little Dipper, which doesn't usually have a lot of stories associated with it. Anyway, that's a friendly one. The next story is from the Carib people from northern South America and from the islands of the Caribbean. And they, you have the island Caribs, and they had spread. There's some argument as to whether they spread from like Trinidad, Tobago, and then up through the island chain and worked their way across, or they also, there's some discussion about maybe, since they've done some archaeological digs and looking at the artifacts that they find and then relating them back to similar things they find on the mainland, that they may have actually come up across the Caribbean Sea at different times and from different sources. One of the things to remember is that down here in the bottom right, it says 8,000 BP, so that's before the present. And the water levels then were probably 15 or 20 meters below where they are now. So the island chain might have been a little more friendly. And I would have thought traveling from island to island, particularly if you could see it, would have been more encouraging than heading out and you weren't quite sure where you were going. But Columbus, the Carib people were the native group that met Columbus when he came to the Caribbean. And he commented that they had these large canoes made essentially out of a log, and they would have 16 to 18 people in them. And he said that he had seen these vessels out amongst the islands where they might have up to 60 to 80 men in one of these large canoes, which seems somewhat amazing. However, they were very good seamen and navigators. They were also warriors. And I've got one image here suggesting an image from the Caribs. This is back from 1818. There are a lot of other images that you can find on the net, but they're rather battle scenes with the Caribs murdering the colonists, or they have the Europeans murdering the Caribs, or they show a camp scene where the Caribs are roasting body parts on top of their fires. It's the word cannibal comes from Carib, but it's thought now that probably there were sort of human trophies taken during wartime and battle, and perhaps there was a bit of cannibalism associated with that, but not that it was probably a normal practice. So you have, if you look at the images, you see the kind of European bias about these things. The Caribs had initially fought the Spanish. They worked with the British for a while. They resisted colonization more than most, but eventually were kind of forced to submit. So the story we have today comes from Star Stories, a fairly recent book by Anthony Avini. And Anthony Avini is a He's a professor emeritus. He's written about 40 books to popularize science, and he's sort of one of the original people in the archaeoastronomy time period back in the 60s and 70s. He's in his 80s now. He's still teaching, still writing books. And so the story comes from here. He has, I mentioned, he has his own website, and I mentioned this because I'm going to come back to this. He seems to be pretty knowledgeable. Some of his books are collections of works of other people, particularly of anthropologists and on archaeoastronomy. Anyway, so he's kind of an interesting guy. So the main elements that sort of make up this story, one of them is the avocado. The avocado plays a role in this story, and these come from Central and Southern America. They're now, a lot of them are grown in the United States, and there's a interesting story as to where the name avocado came from, which is a marketing thing. Anyway, so we have here the Haas, which is the typical avocado that we would see today, and below bottom right is some of the ancestral sort of forms of the avocado. Now, the avocado has been regarded as an aphrodisiac for amongst Central American and South American tribes for a long time, and it would appear to have been also a good source of nutrition for them. So the other main character in the story is the tapir, and a tapir is it's like kind of a cross between a horse and a pig, and it stands about 3 feet or so at the shoulder, and it's 200 to 300 pounds. It's one of its characteristics is it has quite a large penis, and this has given it has been anthropomorphized, that this was somehow a very sexual creature, and it's thought that they would also have been great seducers of women. So he's a character in our story. So our story is about Epitembe, who's a young man. He's recently married, and he's collecting avocados from a tree. Meanwhile, his new young wife is nearby collecting firewood. Now, what he doesn't know is his young wife has a lover who's a tapir man, probably a shaman that's who wanted to get close to her, so he takes the shape of a tapir. And he's promised her that he would turn back into a man, and if the two of them would sort of flee to the east, and then they would go up in the sky together. So Epitembo comes down from the tree. Meanwhile, his new wife has decided that, yeah, she's gonna bolt. And so what she does is she cuts off his leg with an axe, and then takes off with the tapir man through the jungle. Now, Epitembo, he recovers, and with a crutch, he pursues the two lovers through the jungle. And as he goes, he's nourished by avocados, and he's dropping seeds and stuff along the ground as he heads out. Eventually, he catches up with them, and he catches them when they're making love. And in a fit of rage, he cuts off the tapir man's head, and he pleads with his wife to come back to him, and she says nope, she's not going to go, and she takes off with her lover's spirit into the heavens, and he follows in hot pursuit, and you can see them now, and they are. She is the Pleiades that we have up here. The head of the tapir man is the Hyades, and then we have the Epitembo, sort of the husband, who has lost a leg, and he's the one-legged man, and he is Orion. And Avini in his story references that Aldebaran is the eye of the one-eyed man, a one-legged man, such as Epitembo, which is a bit confusing if this is also, to me anyway, that if this is the Hyades is the head of Epitembo, who's been the murdered tapir man. So, whoop, sorry about that. A relic from before. So here's two images of the one-legged man, or it says one-legged hunter. One of these is from another one of Avini's books, where he relates essentially the same story, and the other is from an anthropologist, Edmondo Magna, who's Spanish, who's done a lot of work in South America and Central America. And they go on to talk about the role, and that this is also a seasonal thing, because in terms of, we have ripening avocados and avocado seeds being falling on the ground, and somehow this is that cycle, sort of a natural cycle that occurs, tied up with a love triangle, fertilities, shamans, all the usual good stuff. So I tried to sort this out by researching it further. I did find another part of another story from Avini, and where he tells essentially the same story. And at the end of the story, he has a little footnote 4. So I could not find that on the net, but I did find a book in the library, So I went to the library. And so the footnote 4 says, for a detailed discussion of this myth, see Magna, 1988 and 1996. And so the bibliography then takes me over and lists Magna's 1988 publication and 1996, neither of which are fully on the internet. There are some pieces, but nothing that supports me in telling you this story. But I am going to do a follow-up, because I have found that this Spanish book here is available from one university library in Toronto, and so I will borrow that through the university library systems, and with the help of Google Translator, I will try and sort this out. So we'll return to this anyway. So that's the story for today. It's a little bit rowdy. I should mention to you, in terms of Wilfred Buck, that he has some stories on YouTube, and I encourage you to have a look at those. He's a good guy to listen to. His heart's in what he's doing, and he tells the stories quite well. And so that's it for me, Judy.
Thanks so much, Chris. As always, intriguing. It's amazing what the human mind can make up in the sky, right? When they try and explain the world around them and they bring it to the sky above. In the process of pursuing these stories and trying to find information on, why are avocados important here, and finding anthropologists that from a variety of sources recorded that they were aphrodisiacs, and then getting into tapirs. And in terms of how well a tapir is endowed, you could do a little search on your own for that. But there were a number of sort of folklore stories, and they're really quite violent. I mean, it's kind of like, in some ways, in terms of the Inuit stories in the north, which are often have little kind of dark themes to them. But so, and then again, there's the usual thing of the colonists enslaving people, and then the decimation that disease brings, and all of those good things that we've come to know so well. Anyway, thanks. Thank you everybody for listening. Thank you so much for that. Any questions for Chris before we move on?
No, it's just a great story. Thank you.
No, you're welcome. As I say, I hope to have a follow-up with a little clarity on a few items, because And the reason I mentioned Avini is he's a professor emeritus. He's written 40 some books, but occasionally I've heard complaints about some people that write about anthropological things and archaeoastronomy things, but their astronomy is not always that strong. But I would have thought his would have been. So I particularly have this issue with Aldebaran being the eye of the one-legged man, right? It seems to me maybe that should be the eye of Epitembo, the tapir man, and perhaps we would have one of the other stars in Orion being the eye of the husband. Anyway, enough for me. I have to take off now, Judy. I'm sorry. I've got my spouse is coming home from being away, and the house is not quite in full repair yet.
You better get on that.
we will excuse you.
Thank you.
No problem.
Anyway,
Good luck with that.
thank you.
Okay. Thanks so much, Chris.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay. Next up on our agenda is David Hoskin, who is our observing chair. Yes, I have that right. And right. David, you have some news for us as to what's up in the April skies?
Yes, I do. Okay, let me. So, what's happening in April? Well, we're getting a lot of daylight. Some of the spring flowers are popping up. If you're an early riser, you may notice that it's lighter earlier in the morning, and the birds are making a lot of noise. That's a sure sign of spring. And the sun's also getting higher in the sky, and so the maximum altitude at the start of the month is 50 degrees, and by the end of the month it'll be 60 degrees. So that's a good thing for anyone that's into solar observing, that going to be getting views of the sun through a bit less atmosphere, so images and views should be clearer. We're past the halfway point for sunlight, and by the end of the month there'll be just over 14 hours of sunlight. Dawn is currently at 5:13. By the end of the month it'll be at 4:10. And sunrise is about an hour's, not quite an hour's difference from the start of the month to the end of the month. Sunset is getting a little later. Dusk doesn't end until 10:15 by the end of the month, so that's going to make it. You're going to need more coffee if you're staying up to see night sky wonders or to image things at night. Now, the sun has been quite active this past month. This sunspot complex, AR2976 and 2975, these are the sunspots that were responsible for the coronal mass ejections that gave us the aurora display on Wednesday, well, actually early Thursday morning. It was a little later than forecast. I don't know if anyone saw Jason Dane's very nice picture he took from Martinique Beach, which was the astrophoto of the day. Today, I guess, or maybe yesterday.
It was today, David, and then folks, yeah, and folks will see it later in my presentation.
Okay, great. And that was kind of an interesting coronal mass ejection, because it was it's what's called a cannibal coronal mass ejection. There were two individual flares. I think they're M-class flares that led to coronal mass ejections, one being fast, the last one being faster than the first one. So it caught up and merged with the first one and gave a bigger punch to the Earth's magnetic field. Now, there's a new sunspot complex starting to line up with us, AR2978 and 2981. AR2978 is a good sized sunspot. So it should be quite easy to see in a small telescope through a white light filter, or even if you have white light filters for binoculars, you should be able to see it. This complex has a beta gamma magnetic field that has energy for M-class solar flares. So if it erupts with some significant flares over the next day or two, we may be in for another nice light show at night. Just before I leave this, we missed a really nice, probably really nice display because the AR2976-2975 complex erupted with an X-class, X1.3, I think, class solar flare, and that the X-class are the biggest of the solar flares. But it's more or less missed us. I think we're going to get a little side swipe probably some point tonight. But if there is a aurora, it's going to be pretty far north. I don't think we'll be able to see it from Nova Scotia. The moon, new moon was yesterday, April 1st. It's the birds laying eggs moon. You can follow the link to get the correct Mi'kmaq pronunciation. April 9th is first quarter. Full moon is April 16th. Last quarter is April 23rd. A occurrence of note is on April 27th. You have to be up early in the morning to see this. But the waning crescent moon will be very low in the sky, and 4 degrees above the waning crescent moon will be Venus to the right and Jupiter to the left. So that's a nice photo op. If you have a camera with a tripod and telephoto lens. April's a bit of a special month because we have 2 new moons. So on April 30th, there's a new moon, and this is the frogs croaking moon. For Explore the Universe or Explore the Moon programs, there are the moon's if it's a clear sky, the moon's a great object to have a look at and to photograph or sketch. The challenge is to observe 3 mare and 3 craters in binoculars. If you're doing the Explore the Moon binocular program or the Explore the Universe program, as always, the best views are around the terminator. And if you go around the time of the first quarter, you're going to see a large number of craters in nice relief. So April 8th to 10th after sunset is the time to hopefully we have a clear sky. That's the time to get this challenge and to look at a few different craters and mare. Now there's something else happening this month that's noteworthy, and that is that you'll be able to see the lunar X and the lunar V, if it's clear, on April 8th during daylight. So between 4 and 5 p.m., the moon should be, if it's clear, the moon should be visible high in the sky. And at that point, the sunlight, the lunar dawn, the sunlight will hit the top of the tops of high points, tops of crater walls and mountains, and illuminate a V, which will be very clear, and the V is visible for a longer point of time than the lunar X, which is down here. But you won't have to stay up late. It'll be daylight, and it's going to be not quite as striking as seeing the lunar X and the V in the dark. But I've done this in the daylight, and it's certainly apparent on the moon. You'll need a telescope, but well worth the effort. And then you can go and have dinner. You won't have to lose any sleep. The planets. Lots happening with the planets. This month, all the planets are visible at some point in the sky. Mercury will appear in evening twilight around the middle of the month. And this will be the best apparition of the year for the evening. So it's a good time to take Mercury off your list. The maximum eastern elongation of the planet will be 21 degrees, and that'll be at the end of the month on April 29th. So if it's clear in twilight, get your binoculars out or a telescope and have a look for Mercury. It'll be fairly bright. It's magnitude plus 0.2, so it'll be a naked eye, unaided eye object. But good, because it's so high, it's a good opportunity to, if you're into planetary imaging, to get an image of Mercury. Venus is still a very brilliant dawn sky object at magnitude minus 4.4. Last night, early this morning, which it was cloudy. It would have been early yesterday morning, April Fool's Day. It was cloudy. It was rainy. Yeah, it wasn't nice. But Saturn and Mars were both nearby Venus. Neptune will have a very close conjunction with Venus on April 27th. So the challenge here is that Venus is so bright, and Neptune is going to be quite dim compared to Venus. So seeing Neptune in the glare of Venus is going to be a challenge. I don't think you're not going to be able to see this with binoculars, but a telescope might allow you to see Neptune very close to Venus. Mars is another object in the pre-dawn sky, a magnitude 1, so quite easily seen with the unaided eye. And on April 4th to 6th, there's a close pre-dawn conjunction of Mars with Saturn. Middle of the month, Jupiter makes an appearance again in the morning sky, magnitude minus 0.2. And on April 12th, it has a very close conjunction with Neptune, 0.1 degree separation. So nice and close. Again, a challenge, because Jupiter is bright, not as bright as Venus, but still quite bright in comparison to dim Neptune. So there'll be a lot of glare from the gas giant, which may obscure your view of the ice giant. Saturn is now visible in the dawn sky, magnitude 0.9, and as I said, there will be a close pre-dawn conjunction with Mars on April 4th to 6th. Uranus is in the evening sky currently at magnitude 5.8, but by the middle of the month, it fades into the evening twilight. Now, tomorrow on the 3rd of April, if it's still clear, you'll see Uranus close to the waxing crescent moon. And finally, Neptune will emerge into the morning twilight by the middle of the month. Very low in the east, so you'll need a very good eastern horizon to see Neptune. Here are the photo ops. On April 3rd, again, all these photo ops, you have to be an early riser. At 5:30 in the morning, Venus, Saturn, and Mars are all close together. Nice camera photo op opportunity. On the 15th of April, I think that's the 15th, I'm sure screen's covering it up. At 6, a number of planets are in a nice line. So from left, we have Jupiter and Neptune, and then Venus and Mars and Saturn. So you probably won't be able to capture Neptune in a photograph because of the brightness of Jupiter, but nevertheless, all 4 planets will be visible in the pre-dawn sky. And at the end of the month, again at 5:30 in the morning, Jupiter, Venus, Jupiter, and the waning crescent moon will form a nice triangle. And off to the right, there's Mars and Saturn. So again, another planetary photo op for those that are up early. Spring constellations are Ursa Minor, Ursa Major, Botes, Leo, Virgo, and Libra. These you can tick off. They're all visible by late evening, well before midnight. So you don't have to lose sleep to get those constellations checked off in your Explore the Universe program. Spring stars. In these constellations to pay attention to, of course, Arcturus, which is a bright red-orange star, third brightest in the sky, and then some lesser bright stars. Polaris is only the 48th brightest star in the northern sky. So it's not, a lot of people think Polaris is a super bright star, but it actually isn't. And then we have Denebula, Zubin Janubi, and Zumin Lamy in Libra, quite low on the horizon. But again, these are stars which you need to identify in the Explore the Universe program. There are double stars in the Explore the Universe program, and the one I want to highlight today, or for this month, is the double star in Ursa Major, Mizar, and Alcor. Mizar is the middle star in the Big Dipper's handle, and if your eyes are good, with the unaided eye, you'll be able to make out nearby Alcor. If you're older and your eyes aren't quite so good, it's a very easy split with binoculars. At one point, it was thought that Mizar and Alcor were an optical double, but current thought is that in fact, Alcor is loosely associated in a gravitational sense with Mizar, even though the two are a light year apart. Now, if you're looking through this, at the double Mizar and Alcor with a telescope, you'll see a close-in companion of Mizar. And this is, so there's Mizar A and Mizar B. And here's Alcor. There's a star that'll pop out in your eyepiece that are between Mizar and Alcor, and this is Ludwig's star. At one point, it was thought to be a newly discovered planet, but in fact, it's just a star, and it's unrelated to Mizar and Alcor. The other interesting thing about this is that Mizar A and B, as well as Alcar, are themselves unresolved double stars. So you've got a multiple star system here of 6 stars, which are all linked gravitationally. And this is one of the double stars in the spring double stars in the Explorer of the Universe program. So very easy one to knock off. And again, you don't have to be up super late. Big Dipper's nice and high in the sky around 10:30. For your deep sky objects, the one to highlight this month is Lot 111 or Colander 256, also called the Coma cluster. It's easy to find, a really nice binocular target. If you look south of the 4.35 magnitude star Gamma Coma Berenices, just south, you'll find the Coma cluster, Lot 111. And looks very nice in binoculars. It's quite a fairly dispersed cluster. Nice one to photograph as well. And that's it for April. Are there any questions?
I don't see any in the chat, but if anyone would like to ask David a question, please unmute yourself and ask away.
What's that current image of?
Oh, this is the Needle Galaxy, one of the galaxies in the Virgo cluster. I imaged it maybe last week. Kind of, this area is lousy with galaxies, as you might know, because you can see I can see at least 3 other galaxies in this particular image here and there and there. It's probably a few more. I think there's one here too.
Nice.
All right, I'll stop sharing.
Well, thanks so much, David. Thanks for that presentation. For people that would like to be reminded of what David said, it is posted on our website. So just go to our homepage, halifax.rasc.ca, and it'll be on the homepage. You can see it there if you'd like to go through his slide deck yet again. Next up, excuse me, is Paul Heath. Paul is our outreach chair, and he also happens to be what I refer to as our resident poet. And consequently, Paul does have a poem this month. Share his poem called Storyteller. You want to tell us a little bit of background on this, Paul, and then I'll...
Well, basically, it's a lot of the star lore that Chris refers to is cultural, and as most people know, the culture, you pass the stories on from the elders to the children, and when they become elders, it's passed on and it's passed on. So the stories are retained within the various cultures, and each culture has a different story. But there's one based on stories I've heard over the years, and stories that Chris himself has related, that there's one constellation that is sort of fixed in our northern sky that is reflected in almost every culture pretty much the same. So the poem sort of relates to the passage of that story. So, Storyteller. The scene is fixed upon time. A fire crackles and snaps. Its light flickers upon the wall behind. Before it, darkness rises into the bejeweled firmament. One stands at the edge of heat, his hand raised towards the jeweled sky. The bear gazes down. Upon the dark and shrouding flickering light, upon the mesmerized cluster of souls. Eons have passed since the first fire flickered and danced across the sheltered overhang of stone, since the first one stood at the heat's edge, raising a hand to the speckled wonder above. The bear gazes down. Sparkling fires spread across the lands below. Arms lift, a sea of eyes fill with stars. Each fire scattered in time on grassy plains and shadowed forest glades, on parched desert sands, mountain slopes, and graveled shores. At heat's edge, one stood, hand raised to the sparkling image in the sky. The bear gazes down. Listening, his tail spreads across the twinkling night, lifted high from the small and flickering firelight. The tail shifts with time and space, yet the image holds upon the sky. A creature large, both fierce and shy, a story rich that never dies. And the bear gazes down, once again to hear his tale, a tale the storyteller passes age to age. And storyteller this year is Chris.
I think so. And you're helping to enhance it with your poetry. This is wonderful.
Thank you.
So it fit in well with the Ursa Minor, although it turned out it was about foxes and whatnot, but the bear.
I heard a similar story about that when I was in the Arctic from a hunter in Resolute. So it's,
no, beautiful poem. Thanks so much again for another edition.
Thank you.
Fabulous.
One other thing before I go, I don't know if you can see, the Sky News for our club has arrived for this month. And
yes.
The end of night is the main theme for the new Sky News. So hopefully everyone will be getting that soon. And well, I'm sure we're all familiar with the loss of our night sky.
Yeah, and you have your edition before many of us do. I know I haven't.
Well, I've got a box of them, so
there you go. Yeah.
So anybody doing any outreach, let me know, and I can make sure all the copies are distributed properly.
Great, thanks so much, Paul. Okay. Last but not least, it's me. And let's see here. Go back to that. Yeah, this is updates from the board. This is the opportunity that the board has to make sure that you're kept up abreast as to what we're up to, as well as what's happening from the national level. And one of the questions that people often ask when they're holding events is, am I required to get the RASC liability insurance for our events? Thanks to the National Council's efforts, we now have a document called FAQs regarding RASC liability insurance. It is now posted in our policy section. It's the very first document at the head of our policies. It's a very informative document. And I'll have you read it. I won't go into the details, but it is there. So if you're wondering about whether or not you have to request this, there's some really easy answers regarding that. Nominating committee, we're still looking for potentially a couple more members. So if members are interested in participating in that, please let yourself be known to either me or to Peter, because we will have, otherwise we'll be starting to twist some rubber arms very shortly. With respect to our SCO guidelines, as you can appreciate, they change given these changing times. They're into phase 3 now, which means all restrictions are off with respect to the SCO site. However, members are still strongly encouraged to continue wearing masks, to distance when appropriate, and to get vaccinated. On the right-hand side of the screen is the current policy, or the guidelines for using SCO. Now, the difference being, the document is things to consider when you're preparing to go out to SCO and what to do once you're there. You can find that document if you look at our main site under observing. You will see, if you click on observing, you'll then have a column entitled St. Croix Observatory, and I've put guidelines here in blue because that's the word you're looking for. The part in red at the top of that column is the guidelines that we're referring to on the left side of the screen. Okay. And it has come to our attention that they are locking the gates temporarily to the road that goes into SCO because there had been some vandalism done to a home up that way, a rather severe vandalism. So until insurance requirements are met, if you are intending to go and you are confident you will be going, please contact John Ledard, who's our SCO manager. And you can reach him at scomanager@halifax.rasc.ca, and he will notify the folks there, and they will unlock the gate for you and have it open when you arrive. Halifax Under Stars. Well, we've got a few. One as part of the Journal of the RASC. As per usual, Blair MacDonald has another edition of Imager's Corner, and he's looking at two nearly identical systems. You'll have to read that. I did not include the whole document, obviously. And also, if you're watching live at 5 on March 16th, you will have seen Dave Lane explain the seasonal time change and what was involved there. Also, Jason Dane in the Chronicle Herald on March 15 had this photo of the Aurora Borealis, and I apologize to Jason because there's a crease across the picture. That's where my newspaper was folded. So apologies to Jason, but it was an incredible photo nonetheless. And as David Hoskin mentioned a few minutes ago about the astronomy picture of the day, it was Jason's picture as well, and there it is there in full color. It's absolutely amazing. Great job, Jason. And I apologize to Lisa Ann and to Tim Doucette, who have not been sitting on their laurels. They have been busy speaking to other centers, such as Montreal Center and a couple of others as well. So kudos to them for their efforts in keeping different aspects of astronomy alive in other areas of Canada as well. Speaking of Lisa Ann, she's our editor for the Nova Notes newsletter that we have for our center. And John McPhee is our copy editor. If you want to submit an article to Nova Notes, please have it to Lisa Ann by April 23rd. And you can reach her and John at novanoteseditor@halifax.rasc.ca. And one of the things that she wanted me to make sure that people knew is that she's issuing a challenge. She would like you to send in your stories, photos, sketches, and anecdotes, and she would like to have a Messier-packed edition for the March-April edition. So if you have any photos, sketches, or some interesting stories you'd like to share regarding your discovery of any one of these objects, please let Lisa Ann and John know. And also some sad news in terms of the print option. The board has been reviewing distribution of Nova Notes through a subscription mode that we have had for years. We reviewed how much it's been costing us in terms of postage and in printing, as well as in the challenge of finding a dear soul to actually print and send these things out. So unfortunately, effective immediately, we're no longer offering the print option. However, to those 10 dear souls who have already paid for that subscription till the end of this year or January, February edition of 2023, we will honor that and you will get your issues as requested. But it has been removed from both the renewal and for the new membership piece. If you have any questions or concerns about it, I'd be open to receiving them. Just email them to me or to Lisa Ann and we will address them. Also, just as a matter of interest, as of yesterday, we've begun Global Astronomy Month. Go to the Astronomers Without Borders website. There are some really interesting programs coming up, especially in the coming week, on all sorts of aspects with respect to astronomy. So have a boo, and I'm sure you'll enjoy at least one of their presentations. I know I'm going to participate in a couple of them myself. Heads up regarding our meeting dates. Those are the upcoming ones, and you'll note for now, it just still says Zoom there. We do have a work group co-chaired by Dave Lane and Bob Russell, along with members Blair McDonald and Jerry Black. And we are investigating how can we integrate in person along with Zoom, appreciating there are people who may not want to come to meetings at this point in time. And also there are people that are just too far afield to actually participate in our meetings. So we don't want to lose that connectivity between all our members. So we are looking at hybrid meetings and how best we could approach that. So they're going to be investigating that. So stay tuned. We will let you know as that becomes more clear and defined as to what we're going to be doing. And again, if you have, if you've reviewed any, if you'd like to submit or would like to present a review of your astronomy gear, or have a book that you'd really like members to know about, this is really cool, please let us know, and we'd welcome you to be one of our speakers at our meeting. And also, please mark your calendar with these special events. And these events that we're talking about now, the 4 of them, will happen provided COVID doesn't change the way that we do things. So for now, we're celebrating the 25th anniversary of SCO on Friday, June 10, with a rain date of Saturday, June 11. The details for this have not been worked out, but we will be forming a committee to look at how best to do this and what types of things we will be doing at that celebration. And because of the late time at which it turns dark at that point of the year, we probably won't be holding an official observing session, but certainly members would be welcomed to stay later and do so. Second is the Ketjum-Kujik Dark Sky Weekend, which is a joint venture, but it's organized by Ketjum-Kujik National Park and National Historic Site, and we participate with them to present a series of events. Peter Hurley and Tony Schellink are working with Ketjum-Kujik to work on this event and organizing, so I'm sure you'll be hearing more from them as well as we get closer to that date. And the next weekend, which the new moon happens on August 27, is our Nova East Star Party. Fingers crossed, it does happen this year. We do have a committee to look at Nova East, and we have met once. We're going to be meeting in the coming week, I do believe, or so. And stay tuned again for that. We'll be letting you know when the website is up and working, and you can look at the events that we will be planning. And yes, we do have access to Smiley's Provincial Park, so that's already been organized. And last but not least, this summer is September 23rd, which will be our annual SCO barbecue, and the rain date being the Saturday. Our annual barbecue had been moved from June to September for 2 reasons. One, it gets dark earlier, and most importantly, the bugs are a lot fewer, so that it's a lot more enjoyable that way. So this summer, yes, we will be having 2 barbecues, one to celebrate our anniversary, and one is our annual barbecue. So look forward to all of these events, and the gods be willing, they will all occur. From the national perspective, certainly the Insider's Guide to the Galaxy is still up and running. There's 1 more week left on April 12th. They haven't told us yet what the session will be about, but I'm sure it'll be intriguing. And of course, with all of these sessions, there's been the Messier Minutes. If you're interested in watching them, you can go onto the RASC website and you can listen to each of them. At the beginning of each one, there is a short section on the Messier, certain number of Messiers, and there's also workbooks for each session that you can print, and work towards your Messier certificate. If you're a Nighthawk, and I do mean a Nighthawk, they are live streaming a Messier marathon from the remote RASC telescope. Keeping in mind it's in California, which means it starts at 8:15 p.m. Pacific time, which is 12:15 a.m. hours. So if you want to stay up for the Messier marathon into the wee hours of the night, you might want to take that in. Also want to remind you of our GA. It is now on the website, and if you had the RASC bulletin As of this, yesterday, I believe, this is in there as well. You can purchase your tickets and whatnot for this. And I do believe it's another virtual. So stay tuned for or look for more information with respect to that. Now, if you're not a member, how do you join? Well, it's really quite simple. There are two places you can do this. On the left, you see the masthead for the RASC, and on the right is a segment on ours in the excuse me, on our website. Each of them has a join section. So if the masthead has the join now, ours has a blue join. When you click on that, you will be sent to this particular page on the RASC website. You select which one of those you would like. If you want your regular membership, youth or family, or if you want to give a gift membership to someone, click on the respective button and that'll take you through the process of joining. You're already a member? Great. Let's make sure you renew. Well, it's really easy to renew as well. Again, looking at the two, there's the renew membership there, as well as the renew button on our website. And that will take you to this site. Again, you'll notice the same 4 choices are there. However, on the top there, it says log in, and that's to the secure site. So you may have to log in again at that secure site, and that will then bring you to this type of page regarding your membership. It will, and you'll notice the arrow down there in the lower right of that particular window. It says renew membership. You would click on that to renew, and it would then lead you through the appropriate format to do that. You'll also notice my account. Please make sure that when you go into this, or if you haven't, please do go into it and make sure that your personal information is correct. Your name, address, phone number, email address, all that information that you need for RASC to contact you is in fact accurate, because nobody can correct it except you. So if you would like us to keep keeping in touch with you, please make sure that that is up to date. Also, you'll also note on that same page the forum listserv. These are discussion groups, and there are 3 that you are automatically subscribed to. One is the RASCals, which is the discussion list. There's the education, public outreach, as well as the light pollution abatement forums. If you do not want to be participating in any of these, there is an unsubscribe button that you can click on and say, I don't want to hear this. So that's perfectly well and good. You can then subscribe to any private ones. Now, mind you, this is mine, and you can see that because I'm a member of RASC Council and I'm currently the president, that I'm part and parcel and can participate in those 2 particular forums. So be aware of that as well. And if you really don't like connecting through the internet, you can do it in person by contacting mempub@rasc.ca, and you can give them the particulars as to how you want to be contacted to go through whatever process that you need, be it renewal or gift membership. Recognizing that COVID is presenting some challenges for some individuals with respect to finances, if you do need financial assistance, RASC will do so. All you have to do is, again, contact mempub@rasc.ca, and they will assist you in that. I've also noted here on the left-hand side that the national office has moved, so be cognizant of that fact. You have their past address in your contacts list to make sure it's updated as well. So if you align yourself with our center, there's also perks for joining us as well. You certainly have can access our email discussion list, and you have access to the St. Croix Observatory. For members that are with us for more than a year, you can contact our SCO manager, and he would take you out to the site and bring you through the SCO setup, especially if you want to access or have access to a key to access the warm room and the observatory itself. So be cognizant of that as well. Any questions? Okay, well, thank you all. I'm sure we'll keep everyone apprised, and our next meeting is on May 7, as we said earlier in the one of the slides. So we'll see you then. In the meantime, I'm sure we will keep everyone apprised of all the excitement that's coming up, given, fingers crossed, COVID times are slowly weaning, but time will tell. So farewell till next time, and I will stop the recording, and members and guests are welcome to join us for the Astro Chat. So see you next time. Thank you.